all of the Arabs that were kicked off of the land were kicked off by Jews that had purchased that land. All of the land that was taken prior to 36 was purchased by
It was not.
purchasers of land. It was.
It was stolen.
There was no land that was conquered. No, there was no stolen land. It was all purchased from prior owners.
This is precisely why the Palestinians rejected the 1947 partition plan, because on top of that, they had been killing people, they'd been stealing land, the Peel Commission was a lie, and then on top of that, they were the minority, but they wanted 56% of the land. The bottom line is this: they were the minority. So if they're the minority, why are the Palestinians going to go ahead and concede to these individuals who are violent colonists, stealing their land, killing them? Why would they agree to that? So let's start with 1937, right, with the Peel Commission. So with the Peel Commission, basically the Israelis were going to get 20% of Palestinian land, which was, most of the coastline and most of the fertile agricultural land. And we're going to see a trend here where when the Israelis negotiate with the Palestinians, well, before it became a state of Israel, but the Zionists, the colonists, it was never really in good faith. And what it was they were trying to get the best land and the most fertile land where they would basically be able to control the farming.
Sure. Can we real quick on that?
Yeah.
So my understanding is that most of the fertile land would be kind of like West Bankish area, and then the rest of what would have been given to Israel, at least in Resolution 181, which I think mapped pretty closely onto the
I'm talking about Peel
like the Negev.
right now.
Yeah, but I think 181, kind of mapped onto what the white paper in 36, 37 said. But most of that was like Negev desert. And there was some fertile land, but that land was only fertile because had come in and had like hardcore put a ton of effort into working that land to make it fertile. Like it wasn't originally.
No, the Palestinians had it first. It was labor unions, right? It was Israeli labor unions that took that from them, that they had cultivated it. And then what happened was the Israelis came in, they kicked them out, and then they created these labor unions where Palestinians couldn't sell their merchandise. They couldn't do business with them. And they brought in these unions. And this is back in the 20s, this has been going on. So, okay. So first they come in, right? The Zionists come in and they colonize, right? The Palestinians bring them in and they allow them to come in. As they come in, these are refugees, etc. They welcome them in. And then they start to realize, like, okay, these people are starting to take more and more land. They're starting to get more violent. What's going on here? And then these labor unions start popping up and they start taking the land, and then they start basically kicking them off their land, of this fruitful land that they had already cultivated.
Okay, hold on, wait.
And this has been going on for a while. The name of the organization was called the Histradot, which was basically labor unions that pushed the Palestinians out. And
sure. So I think in terms of pushing people out, there were two organizations that were created for the Zionists. It was like the Jewish Agency and then the other one, I don't remember. But the reason why they got kicked out, the Palestinians did, is because they bought this land from prior owners. Originally, I think part of the Ottoman Empire, and then I think afterwards. But there were huge swaths of land owners who were they were absent owners. But then once the Jewish organization would buy the land,
so they just took the land.
Move in Jewish people. Well, they bought
of
it.
The absent.
Right?
Of the absent.
Did they do it legally?
No, so a lot of the people were absentees, and then the people, and then when they did buy the land, and this is bad, like once we start getting into 1948 now, 1937 it was even less. In 1948, they only owned about 6% of the land that they purchased.
Sure.
That's why I'm trying to stick. Let me stick with the Peel. Let's stick with Peel real quick, right? Let's stick with Peel.
Sure. Wait. There's like a ton of claims that just got made. So just to see those, and we can go through the Peel Commission report if you want. But like the land that was taken, there was no mass exportation of agricultural goods from the mandatory Palestine area, right? All of the farmers that existed that were Palestinian did subsistence farming. They just farmed enough to feed their family. And when Jewish people came in, they're the ones that brought huge swaths of agricultural, I guess, like fertilization to a lot of this land. That's why there's a lot of fighting over, is it the Galilee or whatever, the sea to the northeast or whatever, to route water and stuff.
Yeah.
That they had to fight with Syria. I think in the 60s they fought like a big water war basically over diverting water. But that land was nowhere near as fertile, or it wasn't really used much at all until came in and started working that land and then started to like make it more agricultural.
Yeah, but they stole it. The point is that
well,
that's
they didn't
cool
steal
that
it, though. They bought it. They bought it.
No, they did not buy it. When we get into the 1947 partition plan, they had only owned about 6% of land in 1947. So I'm talking about 1937. So they didn't own anything. They owned very little of the land. That's why they didn't accept the 1947 deal in the first place. But let me hit the Peel Commission.
Wait, we had it because it's important. They didn't steal it. They bought it. When you say they owned 6% of the land for the
that's 30, what they purchased.
For the 47,
that's
when
what they purchased.
Owned 6%. I know the number you're talking about, but that's just like where people lived, right?
No. That's what they bought. That's what they actually owned and bought fair and square. The rest they stole.
No.
So which part did they steal? What part are you referring to?
Okay, let me start with the Peel Commission first. So here's the problem with the Peel Commission, right? So it was in 1937. The thing that people need to understand, right, if I'm going to be very nice and simple about this, the Peel Commission was basically a veneer, right, that your boy Ben Gurion utilized to legitimize them beginning the colonization process. So it started with 20%. Now, how do we know this? Ben Gurion himself wrote letters to his son admitting back in October of 1937 that they were going to start doing these exercises of diplomacy, but the goal from the beginning was always to take the entire land. And that's irrefutable. This is his own letters to his son. So they feigned diplomacy in the beginning with the Peel Commission, and then they continued it on through the 1947 Partition Plan, the Camp David Accords, and it continued on throughout the entire time. Oslo Accords, and we could go through all of it. But the Peel Commission was the beginning of the lie, where they would start to go ahead and start to take the land aggressively. It was the plan from the beginning. So everything was feigning diplomacy. And that's assuming that we're even, this is me coming into it saying like, okay, they're having a fair ground where they can even negotiate. Keep in mind that they had been displacing Palestinians, they had been killing Palestinians, they had been doing a whole bunch of BS prior to the Peel Commission, and then the partition plan, they've been doing a bunch of BS with that too, as well, prior to that. The two are kind of connected, but I'll let you respond.
What is your impression of like where the Peel Commission came from? Or why did the Peel Commission happen, I guess?
It was to get international recognition and get their foot through the door to be taken seriously as another entity so that they can start creating, right? This was the birth of the Irgun, the Haganah, and the Stern Gang. This was the beginning of Israeli terrorism at this point because the Peel Commission legitimized these illegal colonizers.
Okay, so since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British they moved to this mandatory system, the Brits and the French people, to kind of carve out a lot of these different territories in the Middle East so that after some period of time, an emerging government could take over these lands so that they weren't doing all of these colonization projects anymore, right? So obviously, in the mandatory Palestine territory, there were a lot of issues with violence that was escalating on both sides, right? I think one of the more notable ones, like I know Jews were fighting against Arabs, but there were also Arab massacres against Jews, like I think the Hebron massacre, and I want to say 29 was a big one that gets spoken about. Yeah, so there's a lot of violence back and forth. I think that initially the idea is that both of these people can live together, they'll figure their shit out, it'll be okay. And the notable thing, so the Peel Commission was a royal commission by the British government that was headed by Lord Peel. And the goal was to do a survey of the land, a survey of the people, and figure out, like, how do we get these people to work together? Like, let's account for everybody who's here, what's going on, like, what can we do? And I think the Peel Commission was notable because for the first time, the recommendation was these two people probably can't coexist in the same state. And that was a big deal at the time because nobody considered up to that point that it was going to have to be two separate countries. Now, that wasn't how any of the mandatory period worked. But this was at the behest of the British. This wasn't like a Jewish plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now I don't dispute. I agree with you, Destiny, that I believe also that the Brits came in good faith because they knew at some point that they were probably going to need to figure out some kind of plan to get rid of this land and do it in a peaceful manner. What I'm saying is that the Zionists, and what would later become Israel, did not approach this in good faith. They came with it precisely for what I said before, to, hey, look, international community, we're doing diplomacy. We want to work with the Arabs. But the plan from the beginning, and this is from Ben Gurion himself, the plan from the beginning was always to take the land in full. Just do it to,
sure,
to do it slowly.
Yeah, but I mean, like that. So
you can't negotiate. That's them sabotaging peace. They never wanted peace.
Same thing with the Palestinians, though.
Well, okay. Well, realistically speaking, it was their land from the beginning. You got a bunch of colonizers from Eastern Europe.
We can make the excuse for it. But I'm just saying that, like, the difference is neither side really wants peace. But the Jewish people, whether it was because of a European background or whatever, were a little bit better at politics. But if the Arabs would have confronted the Jews and said, fine, we accept this partition plan, we accept these borders, would have had to accept.
Okay, now we're getting into 1947. Okay, we can go. Okay, so I think we're done with Peel. You know, your position's your position.
Sure, but also, wait, one more other
sure,
thing.
Go ahead.
All of the Arabs that were kicked off of the land were kicked off by that had purchased that land. I think it might have been mostly under the Ottoman Empire.
No,
prior.
Back then. And now we're getting into the partition plan. So my position on Peel is that
this is prior to 1920. Like most, like bought land from
by 1947, Stephen. By 1947, they only owned 6% of the land, so they could not have owned more than that in 1937 or in the 20s.
Yeah, but the rest of the land wasn't owned by people. Cite that number, but then you pretend that the Palestinians own 94% of the other land. That's not true. Though.
Yeah, they're indigenous to the land. It was theirs. They were there before.
No, they weren't there. They weren't there all over the place, right? They had like 12% or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but like people just didn't live all over. The vast majority of the Negev was basically
there were villages all
empty,
over,
except for some Bedouin. There were some villages, but but not like villages. It was
Stephen,
villages of subsistence farmers. People.
Who owned most of Palestine then at that time?
Nobody did. You have to consider that region, that Levant, existed as kind of like a territory of the Ottoman Empire. Once the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it was the Brits that came in and carved out and said, initially it was a larger area that included Jordan as well, and then they chopped off that, and that became the British mandatory state of Palestine, basically.
Yes,
but there's like 6% was I think occupied by, I want to say like 12 or 15% or something was occupied by Arabs, and then the rest was basically just
the Palestinians. Look, so the Brits absolutely messed up here by, basically they made promises to both sides. They had the Balfour Declaration on one side, for, you know, the Zionists, Theodore Herzl and them. And then you had on the other side, they were promising, hey, look, if you help us fight in this war, we will go ahead and we'll get you your own land. And that's what the Arabs thought. Okay, the Brits are going to stand by what they said. So going back to 1937, the Peel Commission, my position is simply this, just to summarize. Ben Gurion, the chief negotiator, the head Zionist here, who would later become the prime minister of Israel, the first prime minister, he negotiated in bad faith. This is proven by letters that he wrote to his son on October 5th of 1937, admitting that the goal was just to enter the negotiations that the Brits had set up with the Peel Commission to give them legitimacy as going from violent colonizers to a potential agreement where they could be taken seriously politically. And he used that.
I just think we have to do this.
He used that. Hold on, let me finish. Let me finish my thing.
Okay.
I'm just giving you my summary on Peel Commission. Then you could give yours. Then we'll go to 1947. So he entered the deal, right, or he entered the agreements with the Palestinians with the ideology of we are going to expand. We don't care about what they really want to do. We're just going to go ahead and accept this where it's 20%, but we're going to get all the fertile land. We're going to get all the coastline, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing. We're going to keep using our labor unions. We're going to push them out. We're going to keep kicking them out as much as we can, and then, you know, revisit this later, which they always use that to their advantage. So my argument with the Peel Commission is they used the Brits, the Peel Commission, to create the veneer of legitimacy, but the whole time, and we know this from Ben Gurion's letters, it was feigning diplomacy to take over and create the entire state of Israel and take all the land.
Yeah, okay, that's like negotiating in bad faith or feigning diplomacy doesn't make sense. Both sides wanted more. Like both sides would have agreed to whatever they agreed to. Like, again, if the Jews would have agreed to some like hardcore ironed out borders or some state, then that would have been the state they would have had. But I mean, like, it's weird to say they're negotiating in bad faith when they're hoping to get more in the future, unless we can say they were negotiating in bad faith and we know they would have like betrayed the terms in the future. Number one, so that negotiating in bad faith is a weird phrase to use there. And then two, this Peel Commission, this was just like an evaluation of the land, a survey done at the behest of the British government by, you know, headed by Lord Peel. The idea, this wasn't like a formal agreement. This wasn't like a formal treaty that either side necessarily like agreed or disagreed with. It was just his evaluation of, or that commission's evaluation of, you know, what is the status of these two people. So like at the time, like would have been happy to carve any state out, I think, because then they would have had at least something solid, you know, some kind of solid borders. And Palestinians probably wouldn't have wanted any Jews there at all, or at the very least, they definitely wouldn't want a Jewish state there. So, I mean, like you can say that they were negotiating in bad faith, but if we're going to use that definition, then the Palestinians were quote unquote negotiating in bad faith either. Although these weren't negotiations, the Peel Commission was not a negotiation, it was just a survey of the land. But neither side, well, at the very least, the Jews would have been happy with some land there. The Palestinians didn't want any there at all, or at least no Jewish state.
Well, the problem is that they wanted 20% of the most fertile land, the best land, and they were the minority. And then on top of that, it's not their land in the first place to dictate. Like if someone comes into your house and tells you, hey, I'm taking a master bedroom. Hey, it's a small part of the house though, but I'm taking a master bedroom after you let them in. You're going to feel some type of way about that. And the reality is they were the minority and they wanted the best. It was their land.
It was the British. It was British land.
No, but they were there. They're the indigenous people.
They're not indigenous at all. They were part of prior caliphates that had conquered through imperialism that area. But the land was owned by the Brits. It was the British mandatory for Palestine.
We have Eastern Europeans, literally from like Russia, Ukraine, etc. That's what a lot of these Zionists were. They were all majority Eastern European coming into land that they have no ties to from a bloodline, anything like that. Coming in saying like we're going to settle and colonize. Obviously, the people that were there originally are going to feel some type of way, and then on top of that, they wanted 20% and they wanted the best land. So
we can say that people felt some type of way, and I agree with you. They did feel some type of way for sure, and they
rightfully
felt like they had. Well, you could say that, but again, all of the land that was taken prior to 36 was purchased by Jewish.
It was not
purchasers of land. It was.
It was stolen.
There was no land that was conquered. No, there was no stolen land. It was all purchased from prior owners.
Stephen, Aaron, didn't the Zionists go over and buy land from landowners, absentee landowners?
No, even with the absentee landowners. That's what I'm trying to explain to you guys. Now we can go to the 1947 partition plan. We talked about the Peel Commission, fine. Now we're going to get into the partition plan. The partition plan, that deal was insane.
How can we move on from this? I don't know. Jews conquered land. They didn't even have like a military army or anything. They conquered land from Arabs prior to the Peel Commission. No, it just didn't happen.
No, the Peel Commission gave them the legitimacy to start creating their own paramilitary forces. That's what I'm saying. The Peel Commission gave them the legitimacy, right? So that they could go ahead and create these organizations.
Prior to 36, they bought land from prior landowners. There was no conquering. Okay.
No,
I don't know how, because even in the Peel Commission doesn't say that they
and even if they
land.
Even if they did buy the land, I'm telling you, by 1947 they only owned about 6% of the land. And this is a big point. This is precisely why the Palestinians rejected the 1947 partition plan, because on top of that, they had been killing people, they had been stealing land, the Peel Commission was a lie, we knew that, and then on top of that, they were the minority, but they wanted 56% of the land. And not, so notice how the Peel Commission went from 20 to 56%.
Well, yeah, there's a hard. We can agree to disagree again if we want on this point, but
That's
it's like
fine.
a hard bill.
That's fine.
Like before we get to the split on for Resolution 181, the land, like in the Peel Commission itself, right? I just reading from the text, Chapter 4, the disturbances of 1936. So from 36 to 39, there were massive Arab revolts. But like one of the reasons that they list is number 5 under Chapter 4. They say Arab alarm at the continued Jewish purchase of land. There was no conquering of land. If you read, more into Chapter 5, many Arab landowners have benefited from the sale of land and the profitable investment of the purchase money. The Fellahin are better off on the whole than they were in 1920. The Arab progress has been partly due to the import of Jewish capital into Palestine and other factors associated with the growth of the national home. That's referring to Jewish people. But like there was no conquering of land prior to this, or if there is, I've never seen a source on that ever, unless you just consider Jewish people buying land and then kicking off the Arabs once they bought it as conquering. But there was no conquering of the land.
I'm telling you, bro, they were conquering the land. This is the basis as to why the Palestinians rejected all these peace deals or these negotiations that the Israelis gave in. Because number one, they didn't negotiate in bad faith. A lot of the time they were the minorities, and then they wanted all the best land. So how does it, like, and the way I simply explain it, right, to the people here that might not be as well versed in this conflict, let's imagine that you have a home. You allow people to come into your home, right? Because they're coming in and they're poor and they need money, whatever it may be.
Hold on.
Let me just finish. Happened. Yeah, they absolutely did. They welcomed them.
They weren't welcome. They bought the land.
Since the 1800s, they had let them come in and live alongside them, and they work alongside. Then as they started to colonize more and more, they realized, oh, these people are here to actually take the land and kick us out. That's
the original Zionists that moved there were part of a labor Zionist movement. They would never work alongside Arabs. The entire point was that they had to. There's a saying for this in Jew. Jew fucking speak or whatever. It was about like working the land that they owned. So they would never be working and living alongside Arabs. Once they bought the land, they expelled the Arabs from the land.
No, and that's the point. A lot of the times they did not buy the land, and then on top of that, they put these labor unions, which I literally said earlier, right, where they would push the Palestinians out and not let them sell their produce or only do labor, where they would only do business with each other. So they push these guys out. That's what I'm trying to say. This is why the Peel Commission was a bunch of BS, and these labor unions had been doing this for a very long time. So of course the Palestinians are going to be like, we're not going to accept anything with you guys because you guys are coming in and stealing our land. You guys are pushing us out of our...
We can move to the next point.
All right, let's go to 47.
Wait, just real quick. I'm just going to ask for one thing. I don't do this just generally based, but I'm just curious.
Sure.
Okay, and if you don't have it on hand, that's fine. But like, what is our source here for like stealing the land? Like if we had to think of like one, because I mean, the Peel Commission itself doesn't refer to this. I don't think any of the prior white papers, because I think there were 5 or 6 prior to this.
Oh, you're you're Googling, you're using AI right now? I'm debating you and AI?
Okay. No hands up right now. I'm not using AI. The only thing I have on my screen right now is the text of the Peel Commission refer to make sure that I'm not missing anything in there.
Sure.
Okay. You keep referring to buying stuff and stealing it and kicking Arabs off. That's not true. If you wanted to make the argument that there was some illegitimate purchase of land, the only thing I could possibly think of was that in the Ottoman Empire, but this also contradicts your other claim of the Arabs allowed to live next to them. That's not true.
They brought them in as guests.
No, they didn't, because the Ottoman Empire actually explicitly forbade the purchase of land in the Ottoman Empire. So if you wanted to make the argument of illegitimate land purchases, sometimes Jewish foreign companies would have to create shell companies to buy this land from absent Arab land owners and then do it that way, because the Ottoman Empire wouldn't actually allow Jews to purchase the land before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1917. That's why I know that claim can't possibly be true. They absolutely didn't welcome them in. Number one. Number two, there was back and forth.
What's your source for that?
That the Ottoman Empire didn't allow the purchase of...
No, not for you. I'm asking Maron. Yeah, Maron, what's your source? Like the Jews
I'm just curious with this.
Yes,
they had
I'm
no
talking
military,
about... Okay.
They had no forces. They had no arms. There's no way they could have fought and conquered land from the Arabs.
If you look at the partition plan, the big reason the Arabs, the Palestinians declined the partition plan is because the Israelis only legally owned 6% of the land. So if they only legally owned 6% of the land that they purchased, how the hell are they going to have all this land prior in 1937 or 1920s? Just work our way back chronologically. 1947,
how much land
they reject the partition
owned?
plan. They owned it. It's theirs.
It's not theirs. It was
theirs.
British. It was the British Palestine. It was the British mandate for Palestine. It wasn't theirs at all. What do you mean? Who would they have owned
and
it
who
from?
lived there? Palestinians. British mandate for Palestine.
Most of it was empty.
Palestinians lived there.
But most of it was empty.
Oh my God.
Do you think that Negev desert, even today you can go to the Negev, it's not full of people that live there. You've got like Bedouin tribes. You've got like most people do not live there.
But it's theirs is my point. It's their land.
No, it wasn't. It was the Ottoman Empire's land. What do you mean? And then it was conquered by the Brits.
And the Ottoman empires are what? Arabs.
Yeah, and they lost the war, and their whole
like,
empire collapsed.
And then the Brits had it, but it said mandatory British
Also,
Palestine.
Ottoman Empire was technically headed by Turks, to be clear.
Whatever, Arabs, whatever. Middle Eastern people, Turks. A lot of Turks speak Arabic. The point I'm trying to make here is this: it's very simple. They only owned it. We know this for a fact. This is why they rejected the partition plan. They owned 6% of the land back in 1947. So there is no way that they own anything else. The bottom line is this: they were the minority. So if they're the minority, the big minority, why are the Palestinians going to go ahead and concede to these individuals who are violent colonists, stealing their land, killing them? Why would they agree to that? And they had been destroying.
The reason why they agree is because when they did the mandate, we're skipping ahead now to the mandate.
Yeah, we'll go to the mandate. Yeah.
But the reason why is because.
Maron, do you have that? I still want to know if you have that source.
That's why they rejected the partition plan. You can look it up. This is precisely why they rejected the partition plan. Is because they owned a minority.
They wouldn't have accepted any Jewish state.
No.
1%? 2%? No, they wouldn't have accepted any Jewish state at all. There was nothing acceptable there.
Look. What I'm trying to explain to you guys, okay, is that there's a multitude of different reasons, because you guys have not been letting me go into why they rejected the partition plan. The 7% is just one reason. I can go through all the reasons that they rejected the partition plan, and rightfully so, because it was a bullshit plan. And on top of that, the Israelis were conducting acts of violence and destroying villages all over the place. Women, they're destroying the villages. They were killing a whole bunch of people, stealing land, like the Ergun Haganah and the Stern gang. We had terrorist organizations running a rampage all across. Why the hell would they accept any type of deal with these guys? They were destroying them and killing them. So they have every right to fight back and defend themselves and defend their villages. Like, this is indefensible on the Israeli side, and they were a minority of the population in the area. The only reason they had the weapons is because they illegally smuggled them there from the United States thanks to organized crime.